Charybdis. I awake in the sand dunes under the full moon to the sound of camels slowly munching. Like so often when traveling, I'm disoriented for a moment. Wait, sand dunes, camels, gigantic moon. I'm dreaming, right? Only one sensation offers an answer to that riddle. Before I went to sleep, the camel wallah laid a thick, heavy blanket over me. I can feel its surprising weight on the full length of my body. The blanket is a ballast, grounding me, reminding me I'm resting on the earth and not suspended in the dream world. It acts as an emotional swaddle out here in the middle of nowhere, cut loose from anything remotely familiar. Lying here, held fast by blanket and bed of sand, I stare up into the heavens in utter amazement at the dramatic beauty of the blue-black sky that acts as a backdrop for the swollen moon, and, despite the brilliant moonlight, more stars than I've ever seen in my life. Okay, except for that time I did acid in the desert. I am miles from the nearest city, and that city is many miles from anything else. This distance gives me space, not just to see the world with more clarity, but to imagine a place for me in it. I have parted company with British New York to travel on my own to the magical city of Jaisalmer, the golden city on the edge of this desert land called Rajasthan. I venture up into the farthest reaches of the old walled city to a guest house called Hotel Paradise. At the entrance, a large Indian man in a great turban greets me with a hearty "Welcome to Paradise" in a deep, resonant voice that could belong to James Earl Jones. I rent a room with a view of the rooftops of the walled city and of the long-abandoned summer palace in the distance. The old fortress is quiet and soothing, its thick, ancient walls a kind of dream barrier to the world outside. After a few dreamy days of wandering the narrow passages and browsing the antiquity shops, though, the even more romantic notion of a camel safari entices me to venture out again. And so I pack a knapsack, stow my backpack at the hotel desk, and set out. Seeing the world from the back of a camel lends a perspective not easily forgotten. The camel drivers provide the campfires, food, and traditional camel wallah songs and stories. Nature takes care of the sweeping vistas and one-of-a-kind sunsets. The scenery of endless sand dunes combined with the contemplative rocking motion of the camels is meditative and gives further respite from the bustle of much of India. As we sit around the fire finishing our dinner, the main wallah begins to spin his tale. Tonight he chooses the story of the goddess Mata Tanat, who guards a temple at the border with Pakistan, not too far from here. Our chief wallah is Muslim and his assistant is Hindu, though their repertoire includes stories not only from Muslim and Hindu culture, but also from Tibetan Buddhist teachings, Chinese folk tales, and Mongolian mythology. Tonight, the story involves two wars between India and Pakistan in 1965 and 1971. During both wars, hundreds of bombs were dropped near the temple of Mata Tanat, where there was a temporary Indian army outpost. The story goes that because of the protection of the goddess, not a single bomb hit the temple. Even more strange, many bombs that were falling close to the temple simply did not explode at all. This happened in both wars. Because of these unexplained events, as a show of respect, the Indian Army has set up a small permanent base out there, and the soldiers and the inhabitants of the temple look after one another. Some of the unexploded bombs have even been collected by the soldiers, dismantled, and placed on display in the temple, sort of a shrine to Mana Tanat's great powers of protection. The Camelwala takes a long pause in his story, during which he stares gently at each of us and smiles with a kind of childlike amusement. Then he continues. The Walla says there is very little rainfall in this part of the desert, and successful agriculture is rare out here. Wells are sometimes drilled hundreds of feet deep only to run dry. Yet near this temple of Mana Tanat, there is an oasis, and those who live there are able to grow plenty of food all year long. When we arrive back in town, it's late in the afternoon on Christmas Day. At the desk to retrieve my pack and get resettled in a new room, I'm invited to Christmas dinner in an outdoor restaurant. I sit at a long table with a dozen familiar faces I've been crossing paths with for weeks. There is a 5-piece sitar band, all dressed in white linen, sitting cross-legged as they play. There are paper lights strung overhead. And none of it has the feeling of being cheap or contrived. It occurs to me again that I really am on the other side of the world. The next day, I walk out to the summer palace, past the Indian policemen all carrying their long sticks, and I find a fully intact cow's skull, horns and all, completely picked clean and sun-bleached. Now, in some states in India, primarily due to its sacred status in Hinduism and Jainism, the slaughter of cattle is prohibited. Also, about the time I arrived in India, there were escalated skirmishes between some Hindus and Muslims that involved the slaughter of numerous cows. Aware of the trouble I could be causing myself, and yet unable to resist this rare opportunity, I pick up the skull, wrap the horns with my shawl, put it in my shoulder bag, and walk back into town. In order to get to my guest house, I must walk directly past the huddle of policemen and their sticks. I am almost certain I'll be stopped for questioning. There is an instant when I am approaching that one of the officers looks up at me. My heart skips. Now, there's no way I can turn around. I have no choice but to keep walking. To my great relief, somehow I make it past the policeman and into the fort without any questions. In much of India, cardboard is not used for mailing. Instead, one takes packages to a tailor who sews the contents up into a kind of fabric container and then seals the sewed seams with wax. I ask around for a tailor inside the old fort and take the skeletal souvenir to him to package it up for mailing. The tailor is nervous about the job for obvious reasons and wants me to sign a piece of paper saying he did not package it for me. I try to explain the absurdity of this. Eventually he relents, but not before charging me a premium. I take the package to the post office, writing on several forms that it is a souvenir, and then wait in the crowded line with my conspicuously large package. The official behind the counter, however, is suspicious and asks me to open it. I protest, explaining that if I open it, then I'll have to get it sealed again, and then we'll have the same problem. It'll be a never-ending loop. He leaves the counter and goes back to talk to another man, possibly his supervisor. The two men talk for a while, and then the man who was helping me goes to help another customer, and the supervisor heads my way. I have to explain the exact same thing to the supervisor. He looks at me with a blank slate and then goes back and digs in a file cabinet for another form. Terrified that I'm about to end up in an Indian prison indefinitely, I consider dropping the package right there and bolting from the building. The second man comes back with a 2-page form for me to fill out. At that moment, words fall from the sky and into my mouth, and I tell him I have to be somewhere, but I'll take the form with me, fill it out, and bring it and the package back later. Somehow this works, and I manage to leave the post office still in possession of the package and not under arrest. Panicked, I secrete the package turned heavy yoke back to my room as quickly as possible, and then immediately go to the train station to book passage to Jodhpur for the next morning. I'm thinking that if I mail it in a bigger city, it won't draw as much attention. The next morning, I wake early, dress, pack, grab the bulky yellow, did I mention yellow, parcel, and head out for the train. But before I get there, I chicken out. I start to think about all the ways this little novelty adventure could go bad, including police interrogations and links to the volatile groups who have been slaughtering holy cows of late. Not to mention the trouble of lugging around this conspicuously hard to carry package, on and off trains and in and out of guest houses, in addition to my backpack. In a split-second decision, I abandon the parcel in an empty alley, change my destination at the station, and hop the morning train to Gujarat.